Take number 137, is it? Is this thing on? Okay. Hello, poker players. This is Steve again with lecture number 2 in my cash game Holy Grail series. This lecture is based on the book you see here, but I can't possibly cover everything here that's in that book. So I urge you to read it if you want to delve into this subject more deeply. I also urge you to view the first video in my series on game theory, since that could help you understand some of the concepts I talk about here. My goal here is to produce a cash game opening algorithm that is easy to memorize and simple to use at a live poker table. We don't have access to the dozens of GTO charts at a live poker table, and memorizing them is nearly impossible for most of us. This lecture will first introduce the Combo Power Index, CPI for short, which is the foundation of the Holy Grail system. The CPI is just a number which represents the relative strength of our starting combo for an opening in a cash game to 2.5 big blinds. Then I will introduce the first of the Holy Grail algorithms, the one that tells us whether our starting hand is a proper GTO opening combo or not. You may recall from my previous lecture that we can construct our ranges using GTO Wizard. For example, our implementable 100 stack range from the button is 42.7%, which you can see from this table here. But memorizing these range percentages doesn't help us much unless we can memorize the ranking of hands also. We could put this information into a chart and it would be quite accurate, but this would also be fairly difficult to memorize and use at a live table, especially for 9 max, which we would need to memorize a chart with 3 additional colors. Also, it isn't clear how we should adjust our decision based on the specific players in our game. So, what is a serious poker player to do? The first thing we can do is to create a GTO hand ranking scheme that is easy to remember and use at a live table. I call this the Combo Power Index. The CPI simply assigns a value to each starting hand that reflects its strength for opening to 2.5 big blinds in a cash game. This chart summarizes the CPI algorithm. First, we assign a power number for each hole card. Ace is 15 points, King is 13 points, Queen is 12, and so forth. This is just a card's rank, except for the ace, which is worth an extra point. We double the top card's power number and add it to the bottom card's power number to get a baseline value for the combo. For example, ace-9 offsuit is worth 39 points, 30 points for the ace, and 9 points for the 9. Then we add more points for other characteristics of the combo. For example, a suited combo is worth an additional 8 points, and a connected combo is worth an additional 8 points. We also add 28 points for a pair, 6 points for a 1-gapper, 4 points for a 2-gapper, and 2 points for a 3-gapper. It's very important to understand my mathematical definitions of connector and gapper to get the CPI points right. A connector is a combo which can flop a straight 4 different ways, such as Jack-10 offsuit. Queen-Jack offsuit is a 1-gapper, not a connector, because it can flop a straight just 3 different ways. Similarly, a 2-gapper can flop only 2 straights, and a 3-gapper can flop only 1 straight. Finally, we treat ace-king, ace-queen, and king-queen specially. They get 8 points instead of their gapper points, but they still get their suited points if they are suited. Note also that the average CPI is 32.6 points, so Queen 8 offsuit, which is a 34-point hand, is slightly better than average. Let's look at some examples, such as pocket tens. We double the top card, which is 20 points, add the bottom card, which is another 10 points, and then add another 28 points because it's a pair. So 10-10 is a 58-point combo. Ace-queen offsuit is a 50-point hand because we add 8 points to the baseline CPO value because it's one of those special combos. Queen-Jack offsuit is a 41-point hand since we add 6 points to the baseline because it's a 1-gapper. The worst hand is 3-2 offsuit at 12 points, including 4 points as a 2-gapper. This algorithm is much simpler to memorize than you might think. Simply play an online micro-stakes cash game for a little while, and it will become second nature. In fact, I highly recommend this practice method anyway to memorize all of our Holy Grail algorithms. Coupling our CPI algorithm with the ranges from GTO Wizard, we can create an open index for each table position. The mathematics of this is fairly involved, so I won't go into it here. Instead, I will just show you the result. This Holy Grail open algorithm applies to every table position in a 9-max or smaller game. The second row shows a CPI position index for each table position. The position index is the same thing as the open index. For example, we would need a 42-point hand to open from the low jack and a 38-point hand to open from the cutoff. These CPI position indexes correspond to the open frequencies that you see in the third row. You can see that they are very close to the GTO Wizard mixed strategy frequencies listed in the fourth row. This chart is extremely easy to memorize. We simply open with a 34-point hand from the small blind and increase our index by 2 points for every position that we sit rightward until we reach the low jack -2 seat, which is the under the gun player in an 8-max game. Using the Holy Grail baseline strategy is simple. First, we note our table position, which establishes our position index. We can do this even before our hand is dealt, so we know in advance how strong our hand must be to open. Once we see our hole cards, we evaluate their strength using the CPI algorithm shown here, which we have already memorized. If our hand CPI is at least as big as our position index, we have a GTO open hand. Let's look at two examples. Suppose we are in the hijack with Queen Jack offsuit. We know that our position index in the hijack is 40 points, and the CPI for Queen Jack offsuit is 41 points, which is 24 points for the Queen, 11 points for the Jack, and 6 points for the one gapper. Remember, Queen Jack is not a connector since it can flop a straight only 3 ways. This is a Holy Grail open since our CPI for Queen Jack offsuit is higher than our hijack position index. If we look at GTO Wizard, we would find that opening Queen Jack offsuit from the hijack has an expected value of plus 0.02 big blinds. That's consistent with it being slightly better than a neutral value combo. Let's look at a second example. Suppose we are in the low jack with pocket fours. We know that our position index is 42 points and that pocket fours has a CPI of 40 points. This is a Holy Grail fold. GTO Wizard also has this as a fold with an expected value of 0. That's it. It's just that simple. Now we only need to learn how to adapt this baseline strategy to our table landscape. To do that, we must first understand just how a real cash game plays. So our next task is to compare our Holy Grail opening ranges with the optimal opening ranges in a real game. We do that by purchasing online cash game histories, a lot of them. I chose 6-max NL50 as my baseline so that I can directly compare that online results to GTO Wizard 6-max solutions. So I purchased about 10 million PokerStars hand histories from 2022. I chose PokerStars because there are a large number of available hand histories for a very low price and because I don't play on their site. Then I imported these hands into PokerStriker 4 for my analysis. Once imported, I filtered the hands to study only full 6-max tables, which resulted in about 6.8 million filtered hands from about 60,000 different screen names. We have two different player populations to consider. The first population is all 60,000 players in the database. This tells us how Mr. Average plays PokerStars NL50. For example, we can find his average VPIP percentage, RFI percentage, 3-bet percentage, and many more stats that I have created. These are not the optimal stats. They are just the average stats. We can also analyze the 2,000 players in the database were dealt the most hands. I call these the veteran players. Mr. Veteran plays much better than Mr. Average based on his average win rate, for example. And so he is a better candidate to study in order to find optimal playing stats. I'm not going to explain all the math here again, but the result is a series of graphs which show us how to extract optimal values for each statistic. For example, this graph plots the profit we make at each position on the vertical axis versus our RFI percentage on the horizontal axis. RFI means raise first in, which is the same thing as opening. Each curve has a peak at the optimal RFI value, shown here on the button curve, whereas the GTO values are indicated by the circles, shown here, and the Holy Grail values are indicated by the diamonds, shown here. We can summarize all of these critical values in a simple table. For example, the cutoff values are shown in the second row. We can see that the optimal RFI frequency is 27.8% for the NL56 max players, which is nearly the same as the GTO value and slightly wider than the Holy Grail value. The optimal NL50 values are nearly the same from every position as the GTO and Holy Grail values, except that the button Holy Grail frequency is a bit tighter to make the Holy Grail algorithm easier to memorize. So we can easily use our Holy Grail opening algorithm in a PokerStars NL56 max game with very little error, even though the average NL50 player is not close to a GTO player. This is a key conclusion, suggesting that GTO strategies can work well even in a real poker game. So optimal NL50 opening ranges are similar to GTO ranges, but NL50 players don't open to the same bet size as GTO recommends. This chart shows the optimal open bet size for PokerStars veterans, which are the peaks. The squares represent the average open bet sizes for the full database, which I call Mr. Average. This table summarizes the key information from the plot. We can see several key features of the bet size graph. First, we can see that the optimal RFI size is generally larger than GTO, an average of about 3/10 of a big blind larger than GTO. This is true even though the optimal RFI ranges remain close to GTO values. Not surprisingly, the average player opens too large, about half a big blind larger than GTO and a quarter of a big blind larger than optimal. We can also see that the bet size trend is contrary to the GTO trend, with the largest optimum size for a low jack open and the smallest optimal size for a button open. This is our first lesson in adjusting our Holy Grail baseline to exploit our weaker than GTO opponents. We open larger than GTO while maintaining our GTO open ranges. This is contrary to what GTO solvers generally teach, which is to tighten our range when we increase our bet size. But this GTO solvers solution only exists because the GTO solvers assumed perfect GTO opponents. So when we open larger, we must compensate by opening tighter. This lesson does not apply to a real game. In a real game, we keep our opening range close to GTO while increasing our open size to exploit the poor play of our opponents. In fact, this is the likely reason why the typical open size in a Vegas 1-2 game is so large, 4 to 5 big blinds, or even more, while the typical open size in a Vegas 2-5 game is a little bit smaller, 3 to 4 big blinds. So the easier the competition, the larger we can bet, since donkeys make so many mistakes. But while we do bet larger, we keep our opening ranges the same as GTO. If we study the GTO Wizard opening charts, we will find many combos that are nearly zero EV to open. Some slightly positive and some slightly negative. I call these neutral value combos or just neutrals. Consider a GTO Wizard chart for a 2.5 big blind open from the cutoff. This chart shows the EV for opening every combo, but the numbers are in micro BBs, where I have defined the micro BB as 1/100th of a big blind. The green cells indicate GTO Wizard open combos with a positive EV of at least 1 micro BB. This is at 24.7% range. The blue cells indicate 0 EV combos, but which are still GTO Wizard opens. Perhaps they are slightly positive, but get rounded off to 0. This is an additional 3.5% range. Combined, the green and the blue cells include a 28.2% range, which is what GTO Wizard recommends. The tan cells indicate combos with an EV of 0, but they are nevertheless GTO Wizard folds. Perhaps they're just slightly negative combos, but they round up to 0. This is an additional 5.5% range of combos that we do not play as part of our GTO baseline. These neutrals account for 9% of all combos. GTO Wizard recommends we open with about half of them and fold the other half. But remember, these are all 0 EV, so whether we play them or not will not impact our profit, even against Mr. GTO, unless he has a million hand histories on us and can adjust his strategy accordingly. These neutral combos are the most sensitive to changes in our poker landscape. So starting from our baseline Holy Grail strategy, the neutrals are the combos we should be most often concerned about adjusting, depending on the actual villains we are facing. This table summarizes the key information for opening from the cutoff. Our Holy Grail opening index is 38 points, which is a 27% range, which is just slightly tighter than the 28.2% mixed strategy range that GTO Wizard recommends, which includes all the green and blue combos. But we might want to consider adjusting our Holy Grail opening index by folding the blue combos. If we use a 39-point index, our range would decrease to about 25.5%, which is just slightly wider than folding the blue combos. But if we want to widen our range by including the tan combos, we could use a 37-point index. This would increase our opening range to 33.5%, which is very close to the GTO Wizard range plus the tan combos. So when we are playing in a soft game, we might want to widen our range by a CPI point to include some of the extra neutrals. We might want to open even wider than this sometimes, say by using a 36-point index in this case. This would include some of the -1 combos like A6 offsuit, which might be slightly plus EV in a soft game. Even though we can widen our range in a soft game, which nearly all games are, we should be cautious about it. I rarely adjust my opening range in early or middle position. This is because I don't like to play out of position with a light hand. But I will often widen my range when I'm in the cutoff or on the button, since there are fewer plays behind me and because I will more likely be in position post-flop. Another factor here is that I usually have the best reads on the players to my immediate left, so I can often tell when one of them intends to fold. Or we can simply just play a disciplined Holy Grail baseline, never adding or subtracting neutrals, or even folding our edge combos, which are, for example, a 40-point hand in a 40-point situation. This would still be very close to maximizing our profit, even in a soft game. So we wouldn't lose very much profit by doing that. This ability to adjust our range based on neutrals is a major strength of the Holy Grail system, something we just can't do when using charts. So we just add a point or subtract a point or two to make all of our exploitative adjustments. The CPI and Holy Grail opening algorithms, and those which I will introduce in later lectures, are pretty simple to memorize. But you probably don't want to play in a live game without gaining some confidence in them. Practicing, even for a short time, will ingrain the algorithms in your mind and generate a lot of confidence in your pre-flop play. This is even more important if you are mathematically phobic. There is very little math here, but I know that some players are still reluctant to use it. The more this scares you, the more you should practice. Also, many of you are very comfortable with playing a passive game, but GTO and the Holy Grail strategy are fairly aggressive strategies. So playing the Holy Grail game might seem a bit scary to you. Practice can also help you with this. So I recommend you play online, perhaps NL50 or even smaller. The learning curve for online poker is much faster than for live poker and can be much less stressful if you play low limits. While practicing, I strongly suggest you only play on one table. You need to be able to focus on your action and think about what the Holy Grail algorithm recommends, and then possibly adjust your decision based on the poker landscape. I recommend playing 6 max rather than 9 max so that you can play more hands per hour. Eventually, you will have memorized the algorithms, and hopefully you will get comfortable with the more aggressive playing style. Finally, keeping records is important if you want to improve and move up in stakes. So we have now nailed down what we should do when we have an open opportunity. Our opening baseline should be our Holy Grail ranges, even when we are playing in a soft game. Our bet size should be larger than GTO, especially in soft Vegas 1-2 games. The softer our opponents, the larger we can open. We can adjust our opening ranges to exploit the softer opponents in our game by subtracting a point or two in late position. Against some lines, we can play nearly any 2 cards. Practice, practice, practice. Go online to get comfortable with the strategy. The Holy Grail strategy is so simple, we can summarize it on a single page. So far, we have only the opening strategy, but we will add limping, raising, and 3-betting in future lectures. The CPI algorithm is here. The Holy Grail opening algorithm is here. Finally, we have the Holy Grail summary so far. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Next time, we will add the obvious advice about limping, which is to never do it. I will also provide some actual statistical proof that this advice is correct. We will then learn what to do when we face a limper or 2 ahead of us. Versions of this lecture were presented at the Las Vegas Wednesday Poker Discussion Group in early 2023. You can join us every Wednesday at Tommy Rockers, and you can join our Facebook group and see the agenda for our next meeting. That's all, folks.